but yeah, this is, for all the folks who are joining us, thank you for, being a part of this conversation. This conversation is also going to be recorded. This is a part of an effort from MenHealing. My name is Richard Smith. I'm the anti-racism consultant working with MenHealing. MenHealing is really committed. It's an organization that's been around for years, and they're committed to creating space to support the healing journey of male survivors of sexual violence and sexual trauma. And to date, 1,600 men have been served through their weekends of recovery and their recovery, that essentially just creates a space and a community for male survivors. As some of you might know from the last conversation, 1 in 6 men under the age of 18 has experienced sexual violence, sexual abuse, and they work with adults 18 and over. And everyone who has experienced any type of trauma or anything that significantly impacted their lives realizes how important it is to have community, to be able to connect with folks who see you, can identify with your experiences in a way that unfortunately others may not be able to. So MenHealing has done that. And this is an effort for us, not only just to display all of the people who are connected to MenHealing, like Dr. Debra Warner, but also it's an effort for us to reach out to you and put out a request and an ask for us to reach a goal of getting donations of $90,000 within a time frame of 90 days. And we're pretty close. We're about $22,000, and it's only been about 2 weeks. And so the money that you donate allows us to really be able to support people in creating that space. So without further ado, right, I just did my little spiel and my little ask. I am so honored to have Dr. Debra Warner to be a part of this conversation. Your work is like amazing. Like, in preparation for this conversation, I was looking you up and checking out your stuff, and you've just like consistently been, involved in trying to create space and research and educate and just try to, support male survivors of various forms of trauma with their healing. And, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about that. But, one of the things that really like caught my attention is that, you are a spouse of someone, a wife of someone, of a survivor of sexual abuse. And as a survivor myself, that kind of hit home as I think about my relationships and the things that I experienced. And now I have to like go buy your book, and the title of your book, I'm gonna need to make sure that I have this correctly. His story, her story, a survival guide for spouses of male. Oh, wait.
You close. You're close. Everybody does that. It's his history, her story.
His history, her story. Okay, there we go. A survivor guide for spouses of male survivors of sexual abuse and trauma.
Yeah, and it's right here.
And there it is. And so, yeah, so let's start by that. Let's just start by, talking about the book and why you wrote the book and why male survivors in an intimate way, because it's something that we don't really talk about, and that's why this space is so important. So
yeah. And first of all, people, I don't have a selfie stick. I have all this other equipment, but no selfie stick. So I'm going to move. Sorry. But, but why did I write the book? My husband actually told me to write the book, which was quite interesting, and he's like, you can tell a story where people will listen, because there's a lot of stigma around being a male survivor, as you know, right? And people will listen to you. And, you have a way of telling a story that people want to tune in and hear what you have to say. He goes, and you work with I work in prisons, and I work with mostly males. I wasn't going to say only, but there are a few outlier females, and I work with them, and I get to tell their stories to the court, right? And he's like, there's something to that, and there's something to male survivors in relationships. All of them have broken relationships or relationships that need repairing, because it's a different way of relating, because you don't have, your basis of relating was taken from you. Because when something happens, especially sexual abuse, you know, you're learning, you don't get to have the giggles, especially if you're a kid, you don't get to have that exploration. So when you form relationships, it doesn't form the same way, and the way you react to things is not the same way in a relationship. So it's not going to look like this traditional relationship. And so there's something to that no one talks about. And so I wrote the book from my perspective. He tells his story in it, but the whole book is woven from my perspective of being a spouse with a survivor and all of these things for the spouse to have support, because I was like, this is not like my other relationships. And I'm like, I am, you know, not in Kansas anymore. And I had to learn how to navigate through that, right? But I was alone. There's one book that I'm still waiting for that was written in 1985 about this, that I knew about when I wrote my book. Now there's probably others that have followed suit. But when I wrote this, there was nothing. And I never got that book to look at as a reference. And so I had nowhere to go. And the original idea for my book was to interview spouses. And I couldn't get the spouses or the partners to talk to me, and because they were just so like overwhelmed. And I said, well, why don't I just tell my story? And I got experts to corroborate everything I was saying. So you'll hear my story interwoven, but then you'll have an expert talking about why this occurs. So it's not just me trying to tell my story and be on my soapbox. I have all these other experts that are talking about this phenomenon with male survivors and why it occurs, and it's a guide. So it's not just written to tell my story or to have these experts talk. It's a guide on what to do, how to do it. Dr. Folletti, who did the ACEs, you know, there's a chapter on him, and he let me put his ACEs in my book. You know, I wrote him and I said, hey, can I do this? He said, absolutely. You know, there's a whole chapter on the vampire mix. There's chapters about everything, diversity, multiculturalism, you know, like there's a chapter on LGBTQ, like, and it's all about how that relationship and being survivor comes together and how it's different and what to do.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for that, right? Sharing this story, because as a survivor and someone who knows many men, unfortunately, who experience sexual abuse, some of us, of which we didn't even understand what were the things that were, you know, driving the behaviors that we were engaged in, that in too many instances led to our own harm and harming others, right? Especially in relationships. So I'm really grateful for that, and I'm just thinking about, you know, my personal experiences and the way that I had to heal in order to be able to relate to partners in a way that was like, you know, just driven by my trauma, right? And not bringing that trauma into those relationships. And it's an ongoing journey, right? It's a process, right? There's still things that show up in my relationships that are rooted in my experience of traumatization. You know, there were things that you know, I didn't even understand growing up. And so what were some things that you know, that either through your work or, you know, while you were doing your research for your book, that comes to mind that you would want to share with someone who may just be in this process of like trying to navigate this as a survivor themselves, and also for spouses or partners who might be in relationship with a survivor?
You know, the one thing I always tell people is when a survivor discloses to you, the one thing you can do, just the one thing, is shut up. Because once a man is disclosing, and if you don't believe them, and then you may be the first person he's trusted, because in our society, you can't be vulnerable as a man, okay? And you may be that person, and you go, oh, that didn't happen. He's probably never going to disclose again. He's going to feel belittled. He's going to feel not believed. So the first thing you can do is listen until he's done. Listen to the entire story, even if you think it's not making sense, or you think it's broken, like you can't put the pieces together. Just let him get it out, because that's how he's remembering it. Because realize he may be telling you the story as a 35-year-old man, but he's really telling that story as a 5-year-old kid from their perspective sometimes. And so you just have to listen, no matter who you are. You could be a therapist, you could be their wife, their spouse, you could be a janitor at the school they've entrusted, right? But listen, because that's going to help them form relationships that somebody believed me, somebody listened to me, right? So the first thing is be quiet, you know, then listen. But the thing I always say is, I'm sorry that that happened to you, and I believe you. I say that every single time. I believe you. Because then someone did believe me. They're going to be more likely to be able to tell that story, to open up, to trust somebody, right?
Mm.
So if take anything from that, just the words, if you can't remember anything else I said, just say, I believe you, will be the strongest thing you can say to any male survivor.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's powerful advice and so insightful, right? And we know even like the research shows that the disclosure process is delayed for male survivors for many of the things that you've already mentioned,
20
right? Like,
years.
yeah. And so, like, it wasn't a coincidence for me that, I really came to grips with it during my incarceration, with other men who we had created such a tight knit circle and community within a prison, um, that they felt comfortable enough to disclose. One gentleman, particularly, that it became like a domino effect, and everyone else started to talk about their experiences in ways that they had never shared with anyone. Um, and so, I'm just thinking about your work in a prison, and how does that connect, and how does that relate? Because for us, it was such a, we were all that we had, and we wish we would have had someone who had the wherewithal and the insight to not cringe or even make a facial expression, because you're so sensitive when you disclose that intimate and like really scary. And you're absolutely right. You're like a child, right? And so you're hyper perceptive of like any type of indication that there's a judgment or there's a sign that you disbelieve, you don't believe them. And so how are you able to do that working in prisons, under those conditions where, let's just face it, the prison system is not a humane system. It's not a system that's designed to see people for their humanity. It's designed to see people, it sees people for all of their flaws, right? All of their errors, right? For behavior that deems them criminal and therefore deserving of being encaged. How do you navigate that? How do you do that and create that space?
So one of the things I do is that I remember that I am human, right? And being in that environment, I realize I'm in their home, right? And so I'm trying to be as natural and as normal as possible to make someone comfortable with me. But, the prison system is not set up to be this touchy-feely institution. It's set up for security first, right? So that already provides a distance, and so I realized that I'm a role model for that humanity that's in there. And what's funny is that one of the things I did when, especially in the federal prison, I don't know if I've told you this, or I might have, but everything was pink in my office. Everything was pink. I got one of those old eye doctor chairs, and I put pink pillows on it, and I had Hello Kitty stuff. One, they wouldn't steal anything that was mine because it was pink, right? They're not going to steal that, right? But everything was pink, and they'd be like, they walk in there, but I had a pink rug. Like, these are all things, and I walked right through the front door with this stuff, right? And so eventually I had this office that looked like something that was a regular doctor's office. And I had like things on my desk that were like little decorative things, but nothing that you could hurt yourself with. Like, I thought this through in my head. And they would come in there and they'd be like, oh my God, this feels like home, or this feels, different. Why did you do all this? I said, because I'm trying to bring humanity in here. You are a human being. And the guys would always look at me funny. I'm like, do you feel more comfortable being in here with a soft little pillow than sitting there on an iron slab on the floor in front of me while I'm in a chair? See, and I thought about that. One of the first offices, I remember I was an intern, and they showed me my office. It had a toilet in it, and that's what they were supposed to sit on. While I'm sitting there, I'm like, because you're going to convert a cell? How demeaning is that for somebody? Especially a man talking to a woman, right? I said, no, I won't do that. I will not put a piece of cardboard over the toilet seat and say, have a session with me. So that's when I began to think differently. I said, there's yard. You know, I can go stand at the wall at the yard. That's better than that toilet, right? And then I realized that I earned a respect among everybody, right? And so that's what started changing things. You know, I brought humanity because I was human. I realized I'm a human being. I'm going to show people how to treat people like human. I don't care what you've done. You're still a human being, and you deserve that kind of respect because you have to give it to me. So I need to give it back. That was the difference. And I said, I'm a role model for that. And I never lost it. I still don't. When I go in there, whether I'm talking to someone on the phone or whatever, I never lose that part.
Wow, you're like bringing me back, right? Because that was my life, right? You know, I lived that inhumane space, and I remember talking to a therapist and trying to get that therapist to see me as a human, and the amount of courage that it took. And in my case, it was actually it came after a suicide attempt. And you know, like I do, like, right, the ways in which you get access to a therapist is if you threaten to hurt yourself or hurt someone else, right? And so here I was, and, you know, I mean, the way that I describe it, I journaled for many years, just talking about this healing process for me. But the way that I described that particular moment, it was like the mask that I had worn all my life had shattered into 1,000 pieces. And it was like this boy was exposed, this really innocent, vulnerable, scared boy in maximum prison in this big body. And so, like, you just brought me back to that space, right? And just made me feel that really grateful for you being there, and for those folks who have a chance to see you and experience the humanization that you bring into that environment. You know, last week I had a chance to present on, there was a webinar, and we were talking about the title of my talk was the Trauma to Prison Pipeline. And, you know, what I attempted to do was to help people understand that there were these previous experiences of traumatization that had led to symptoms, which were essentially symptoms of unaddressed trauma, PTSD, right? That because I was a Black person, a Black man, because many of us, right, and you know, your work isn't exclusive to survivors of sexual abuse. You know, you talk about survivors of all types of trauma, right? So we got historical trauma, we have race-based trauma, right? Then we have this interpersonal trauma that can show up as experiencing like gun violence, you know, sexual abuse. And we know that, like, a lot of the things that, you know, gets labeled as deviant, maladaptive, are essentially trauma responses that are unaddressed, right? That have not been considered when you assess a person's behavior, and more importantly, before you label a person. And that was one of the things that I wanted to, like, really highlight, like what that process looks like to you when you get to a point when your behavior gets labeled consistent with racist ideology and white supremacy ideology that says that you are already innately criminal, innately maladaptive, and so forth. Yeah, talk a little bit about that, like, in your work, and how do you balance that when you're talking to someone and you're like, if it weren't for this previous experience of trauma, this person wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I talk a little bit about this in my book, and it's really like I have an innate sense to it. You know, I really can tell when someone's a survivor, but one of the things I say is, so what happened to you?
Right.
I don't ever label it. I don't ever say, and it'll look at me like with this puzzled look. I said, so no, really, what happened to you? Because to get here, to get to me, and I work with the, you know, the most severe mental health usually that you have, right? Something had to happen to you. You weren't waking up having pancakes every morning and end up in my office at 35 years old, right? And so usually that jolts somebody to think, you see through this? Yeah, I do. So let's talk about what wasn't your fault. You can take responsibility for somehow ending up in this chair, and that's great, okay? And I can read that later. But right now, I want to know what's not in there that nobody knows about. And that usually changes the dynamic in the room with me. You know, I remember sitting with someone who, you know, been accused of murdering 12 people and was, you know, in there for life and you know, and I'm just sitting there and he's trying to tell me how he's going to run the session. Like he has to come in there because he was doing something. I don't remember what it was. And I just finally said, okay, so when are we going to get to work about how you ended up here? And he looked at me, I said, no, really, what happened to you in your life? And, you know, and he's like, what are you talking about? I said, I want to go back to when you were 6 years old. I want to go back to when, you know, you first knew that something wasn't right in your life. And that, and the fact that I didn't want to talk about who he had murdered, who he had been accused of murdering, I could care less. I cared about the human being inside that was going to continue down that path of destruction unless he dealt with all that stuff he's been burying. And that's what changed. I remember I had that guy on my caseload for a year. I remember for a year, and he was like one of the hardest people. And they're just like, why does he keep coming seeing you? He must want something. He must want to manipulate you. I said, I don't think so. I said, maybe that's what he does with you. You know, I said, I haven't seen any of that. And so I would just take it out. And that's me bringing humanity again, right? That's me saying, just because this is who he is, this is because this is what he's done, doesn't mean he's going to do that with me right now. You know, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Now, once you do that, that's a different story. But you haven't presented that to me. You know, so that's the difference. You know, that's how I do that every day.
Yeah. We talk about that a lot, right? Like that shift from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And then, you know, the other thing, you know, we also talk about like what's right with you, right? And that's just the beauty of, you know, people talk about resilience, but it's even more. It's like growth and like the way that we can experience certain things. And if we're supported along our healing journey with the right folks who see us, who humanize our experiences, who understand that there's nothing wrong with us, something happened to us, they can really help nurture and help us develop in a way where we can see, we can grow. You know, people talk about post-traumatic growth, not just resilience, like not just bouncing back to baseline performative stuff, but like getting to a place where you're starting to thrive. One of my executive coaches says that, you know, it's like you develop a superpower. And this is not to diminish like the harm and like the impact of the harm. But I wouldn't be sitting here today having this conversation with you if it were not for like the people in my life who did exactly what you described, and then helped me get to a place where some of the things that I experienced are now kind of like gifts and like superpowers that allow me to connect and support the journey, the healing journey of other people. What they say, right? Hurt people, but people who are healing can also support other people on their healing journey. So it's beautiful that we're talking about that. And I think that's the reason why, you know, not think, but I know that's the reason why I was so eager to work with MenHealing. Because there was a part of me that was just like, man, if I had that. And it's been like that in every aspect of like my professional career, right? Like when I was working with young people, I was like, wow, if I had a mentor, case manager who was like this, who could be in my life, or if I had, and it was always a matter of like providing to people what I wish I would have had in those professional spaces. And MenHealing does that, right?
It does. Yeah. Jim does that.
Yeah. So talk about that. Talk about MenHealing, your connection to it, why MenHealing is important, why everyone who's listening and who will be listening needs to know more about MenHealing and the work that they're doing.
MenHealing is like, oh my God. I get a warm fuzzy every time I think about them, you know. But this is the only way I can describe it. This is an analogy. So one of the other things I did in the prison is I had a wand. I had a blue wand that had little fuzzy stuff on it, right? And one thing I learned about male survivors, they're afraid to dream because they're afraid it'll go away, right? So I always said, okay, this is my wand, and I'm going to give you one wish, and you can have any wish you want. I'm going to go tink, and you have it. You have it. And I said, it doesn't matter how crazy it is, right? And they would say all kinds of things, but one of the consistent things that they would always say is that they wanted to be better, right? Well, MenHealing is that wish, it's that dream. It makes that happen. It gives you the blueprint. It helps you realize you're not alone, right? It's my wand. It's my wand, like completely like amplified, right? And so when I joined the board, I said, this can't be true. This can't. Like, you know, there's no place like that this can be true. It can be this kind of place. And I remember I was on the board for almost a year when I finally realized, no, this is legit. this is real, you know? And I remember they had called me. I said, so they said, so we just want to make sure you're really engaged and you really want to be with us. I said, absolutely. And I realized, you know, from that phone call, like, this is legit. And I was like, there's so much work that can be done here. There's so much good, because everybody there is there for the right reasons, right? You know, some people who just want to tag along, or they just want to know someone, or they just want to do it for themselves, or they come, you know, you have board meetings where people come for the free food. Like, you know, since we're virtual, you can't do that. But there are boards where that's why they're there. Okay, we've all been on them. But that's not MenHealing.
Yeah.
Because everybody on the board is also, you know, donating to the cause. Like, we believe that strongly, right? And so this is a board that is a working board. And it also does all of these things for the community so that male survivors can get the help that they need. And they truly want you to get better. They want you to learn. They want anyone listening to know they're not alone. And there's few places I can say that walk the walk and talk the talk, and all the people involved do too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of it has to do with people's lived experiences who are affiliated and working with MenHealing, right? Many of us have experienced the same types of, you know, trauma and violence, sexual violence. And so we can identify on a deeper level, you know, and connect on a deeper level. And it's amazing that, you know, we're able to harness all of that energy. I'm always amazed when I meet someone and hear, you know, I hear about their stories of survivorship, but then hearing about all of the things that they were able to accomplish in spite of that. And then more importantly, how they're using the things that they were able to accomplish in their success for the purpose of trying to support and help other people. And that's the beauty of it. And MenHealing does harness that. You know, one of the things that I've been talking about, and part of the reason why I'm working and supporting MenHealing is because we want to make this more accessible, particularly to men of color, understanding that there's like all of these other factors that like exacerbates the experience, like we talked about earlier, you know, racism, other forms of violence, police violence, all of these things, you know, this like perception of Black masculinity as being hyper in itself, that that kind of allows for systems to feel that they need to, you know, essentially tranquilize us and sedate us and cage us, because there's these myths about us as Black men, as brown men, as being like bestial, criminal, uncivilized, right? And so, like, when you think about, and I know so many Black men, unfortunately, who've had this experience, and they've never been able to talk about this, right? They've never been able to talk about this. And some of that is because we've internalized in the role that patriarchy plays, and like how we internalize these ideas about us being, you know, supposed to be able to protect ourselves and preserve our manhood, even as 5-year-old boys. We learned that early on. And then society just like reinforces it. Like, okay, you are masculine. We talk about the adultification of Black boys, how Black boys on average are viewed as being 8 years older than their actual age because of all of this stuff. And so, you know, one of the things that I'm committed to, I know you're committed to, Jim, and everyone associated with MenHealing is committed to, is making this more accessible for men of color, because everyone deserves a right to heal. And we understand that, you know, unfortunately, the way that our system is set up, you know, the way that I describe it, it's like, you know, a lot of Black men get punished for being wounded. So instead of getting the treatment and the support, which we know is still like not as prevalent as it is for women survivors of sexual abuse, right? It gets even worse for male survivors of color, because you couple that with all these other things. And that's the reason why I'm having a conversation inside of a prison with survivors. And I'm saying, wow, what if we would have got that support? What if we would have had MenHealing?
Oh, I think it would have made a huge difference. You know, the one theme in any survivor's life is that they're alone. Now imagine you're in a prison where you can trust no one, right? Imagine being able to know there's someone out there who will listen to you. Like, that healing can begin you know, and with, you know, their prison project that they're doing, getting those tablets out there to you know, the offenders that are incarcerated, or the people who are dealing with incarceration. I like to say that. You know.
I was gonna check that. I was gonna check that. We shift that language.
Yeah. You know, but dealing, you know, people dealing with incarceration, like it would have made a huge difference in their lives, right? Yeah. I mean, and just having one person bandwagoning, championing that, you know, that is what really, really helps people move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the reason why we need people to donate. And like, you know, I know this is a hard time for everyone. But just think about like how much more difficult it is for people who've experienced sexual abuse and violence and are struggling and trying to navigate these things without a community, independent. Think about the relationships, right? Because this doesn't just affect an individual, it affects the whole family. It affects all of your relationships in ways that you can't even explain. And that's why it's so important for you, you know, the folks who are listening to donate so we can reach this milestone of $90,000 in 90 days. And what that will allow us to do is to provide services to 100 men through 13 weekends of recovery, right? For free, right? Because we don't deny anyone access to the support because of their financial situation. We want everyone to heal. So please, if you can, donate, you know, any little bit counts, you know, towards reaching that milestone so that other people can have access to the healing support that they need. Thank you so much, Debra. It's been a pleasure. Now I gotta go get the book, and you have a wonderful evening.
Absolutely. And if anyone else is interested, just click on link in my bio, and you can also click on it to do the 90 and 90 and donate to MenHealing.